Welcome back. Let me bring you up to date. The ground war against Iraq has begun. It began at 1 o'clock in the morning, our time. Some latest information. President Bush has said the liberation of Kuwait has now entered a final phase. He said, "I have complete confidence in the ability of the coalition forces swiftly and decisively to accomplish their mission." And as we reported just before the break, Iraq's first official reaction has come from its United Nations ambassador, who said Iraq will never surrender. We're going straight to the Pentagon, where Dick Cheney, the Defense Secretary, is about to give a live briefing.
The amphibious landings, any airborne landings designed to go into Kuwait City, liberate Kuwait City. Certainly those are the big questions right now, and hopefully within the next few moments we'll be able to get some of the answers. The Defense Secretary, Dick Cheney, of course, being very much involved in all of these preparations. The President of the United States made his statement. Now Pete Williams, the Pentagon spokesman, is approaching the podium. Let's listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The Secretary has just come back from the White House, where he listened along with everyone else to the President's statement. As a short statement, take a very few questions, and then he'll have to go. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Pete. Just a short time ago, you heard the President announce that coalition forces of Operation Desert Storm have begun a large-scale ground operation against Iraqi forces inside Kuwait. This phase of the combined air, land, and sea campaign has been carefully planned to force Iraq out of Kuwait with a minimum number of casualties to Allied forces. Up to now, we've been as forthcoming as possible about military operations. But from this point forward, we must limit what we say. We've now undertaken a major military operation. Allied military units are on the move. Their positions, movements, and plans must be carefully safeguarded. We must assume that the enemy is confused about what is happening on the battlefield, and it is absolutely essential that we not do anything inadvertently ourselves to clarify the picture for him. Everything we say about the operation from this point forward, every detail we offer, would increase the likelihood that the military forces of Iraq could learn more about our operations. Such information would put military operations at risk, and even the most innocent-sounding information could be used directly against the men and women whose lives are on the line carrying out these operations. We cannot permit the Iraqi forces to know anything about what we're doing, and for that reason, I will not say anything tonight about the operation that is currently underway. We will have nothing to say about it for many more hours. When it is safe to begin discussing the operation, we will do so in as much detail as we prudently can. But for now, our regular briefing schedule here at the Pentagon and in Riyadh is suspended until further notice. I want to assure all of you that we understand our solemn obligation to the American people to keep them informed of developments. But I am confident that they understand that this policy is necessary to save lives and to reduce American casualties, as well as those of coalition forces. I will be happy to take a few questions about the background to the decision that's been made, but let me reemphasize once again, I will not answer any questions about the military operation underway, and at the end of my remarks, we will then, as I indicated previously, suspend all further briefings for the time being. Yes, sir.
When did the President make the decision to go ahead with the ground war and to give Schwarzkopf the authority?
Final decision, of course, to go forward wasn't really resolved until it was clear today that the deadline had come and gone and Saddam Hussein had refused to comply with the UN resolutions. But this has obviously been a massive undertaking with hundreds of thousands of people involved, enormous logistical planning, a great deal of preparation required to undertake this kind of operation. So for some period of time now, we've had a planning date and a planning hour that was selected by General Schwarzkopf based upon when he believed his forces would be ready, based upon when he felt we would have accomplished all we could with the air phase of the campaign by itself, based upon preparations of coalition forces, and that became a planning date. It was subject to change up to the last minute based upon such considerations as weather and changes in the diplomatic situation. If Saddam Hussein had come into compliance with the deadline, had announced by noon today that he was prepared to withdraw unconditionally his forces from Kuwait, then we would have stopped the preparations for an execution of the operation. So in that sense, up until noon today, the President had the option to say, stop. He had approved the original date, again, based upon the planning considerations that I indicated.
Was the original date today?
That's correct. To the extent that we had a specific planning date in mind for some period of time now, it was this particular day and a particular hour.
How long had you been planning?
But because there are different units involved going at different times, I don't want to be any more precise than I've already been. David?
You mentioned that this was a large-scale ground operation against Iraqi forces inside Kuwait. By that, did you mean to say that the ground operation will take place only inside Kuwait?
David, I simply am not going to talk about the operation. I am not in a position to be able to say anything about the operation without compromising the security of the operation, and I simply am going to refuse to accept all such questions.
Mr. Secretary, do you know yet to the extent that the Iraqi forces are resisting?
I do not have any detailed reporting at this point on the operation. It's still very early, the early stages of the operation, and I would not expect that we will receive any comprehensive reporting here in the Pentagon for some period of time.
Mr. Secretary, you had repeatedly said that the ground operation would not begin until you were confident that the air campaign had gotten to a point where much of the risk had been eliminated for the ground troops. Can you share with us what the progress in the last 8 days has been and why you are now confident that there is a minimal risk, or however you want to characterize it, for our ground troops?
Well, I would not say that there is minimal risk. This is a major military operation against a well-equipped, well-fortified opponent. I would not want to underestimate the difficulties of the task at all. What we have said repeatedly was that we wanted to conduct an air campaign for as long as possible to destroy as much as possible of the Iraqi force and to make it easier for us to undertake the ground phase of the operation when that became possible. We obviously have reached that point where we think it's appropriate to kick in the next phase of the campaign.
Mr. Secretary, the President said he has consulted with all the Allied coalition members. Can you give us a rough percentage of how many coalition members actually have committed ground forces and have actually are on the move?
I don't want to do that tonight. That again gets us into the business of talking about specific forces, specific units, and what they might be doing in connection with the operation. A significant number of our allies are, in fact, participating in this phase of the campaign.
Can you tell us about the process of consulting with them, or at least informing them before we went ahead with the ground initiative? Can you give us a little bit of sense of the reaction as you told them we're going in?
There's really been work at two levels. There's been work at the military level between General Schwarzkopf and the other commanders in the field in terms of planning the details of the operation and preparing the forces to carry them out. There's also been extensive consultation by the President and Secretary Baker with the political leadership of those nations involved.
Secretary, Mr. Secretary, the goal of this operation was to free Kuwait, and the Soviets up to this last moment had an agreement by the Iraqis to pull out of Kuwait. What was the sense of urgency to move down to extract Saddam Hussein from Kuwait in light of that agreement?
Well, it's been stated repeatedly, but I'll state it again, that the only acceptable solution to this conflict is for complete compliance by the Iraqis with the UN Security Council resolutions. That includes the immediate, unconditional withdrawal of their forces from Kuwait. As made clear by the President yesterday, we wanted an indication from them that they would begin that withdrawal by noon today, and we gave them 7 days in which to complete it. They refused to do that. It included as well consideration for the fact that the offer you talk about, the proposition that the Soviets and the Iraqis developed, involved a ceasefire prior to any Iraqi withdrawal. We made it clear repeatedly we were not interested in any ceasefires, that a ceasefire would simply have allowed Saddam Hussein to regroup his forces, resupply them, and could conceivably have cost even more casualties. It's also true that that proposition embodied within it the repeal of all the other UN sanctions and resolutions that had been voted by the Security Council. We felt that was totally unacceptable. We've seen just in the last 72 hours what would appear to be a deliberate effort on the part of the Iraqis to further destroy what's left of Kuwait, to put the torch to the oil fields, reports of executions of Kuwaiti citizens inside Kuwait City, and under the circumstances, the notion that Saddam Hussein should be permitted to get away scot-free without being held accountable for his actions or without having to pay reparations, for example, was unacceptable from the standpoint of the coalition. The President's statement yesterday was very clear, it was very concise in terms of what we wanted from Saddam Hussein by way of compliance with these resolutions. It was agreed upon by the coalition. It was consistent with the UN Security Council resolutions. He would have been wise to accept it. He refused to do so.
Mr. Secretary, again, can you put yourself in the position of disavowing any effort to change the government, the leadership, the political structure of Iraq by means of fully enforcing the UN resolutions? Suppose you knock him out of Kuwait and he says, I'm still not going to pay reparations. Do you then go on to Baghdad to set up a government that will pay the reparations?
We've made it clear repeatedly that if Saddam Hussein were to be replaced by another government, we would not shed a tear over his demise. But we've also made it clear that it is not an objective of U.S. policy to change the government of Iraq. If that happens, so be it. With respect to the future application of the sanctions that have already been voted by the UN Security Council, how they would be applied or altered with respect to this government of Iraq or some future government of Iraq is really a matter that the UN Security Council will have to address in due course once they're driven out of Kuwait. I'll do one more question.
Any sort of communication whatsoever today from Saddam Hussein in any form?
None that I'm aware of.
Mr. Secretary.
Again, let me, by way of closing, emphasize what I mentioned at the outset, that we recognize we have an obligation to provide as much information as we possibly can to the press and to the American people. But we are currently engaged in an extremely complex military undertaking. The lives of literally thousands of Americans and Allied personnel are at stake, and we simply have to operate on the basis that we are going to, for the time being, put a lid on further briefings about the operation. As soon as it's possible to do so, General Schwarzkopf in Riyadh, General Powell here at the Pentagon, will be happy to provide as much detail as possible about the campaign itself. But that's going to have to await developments. Thank you very much.
What time did it start?